Hey, when you pick up a book, what do you really see? I mean, sure, there are words on a page, a story, some information, but what if I told you that the book itself, its pages, its ink, its very structure, has its own story to tell? A secret biography, just waiting to be read.
So, what if a manuscript wasn't just a container for a story, but a historical artifact whose life is written all over its physical form? In this explainer, we're going to uncover how to read a book not for its words, but for its life.
To do this, we've got to become detectives. And our main tool? It's a field called codicology. Think of it like the archaeology of the book. Yeah, that's right. We're studying the manuscript as a physical object, where every material choice, every stitch, and every stain is a clue to its past. So let's start at the very beginning of our book's biography, its physical creation, from the raw materials of the earth. You see, long before a single letter was ever written, this whole long, painstaking process was already underway. A manuscript story doesn't kick off with the author. Nope, it starts with the very foundation, the page itself.
So, what were these ancient pages even made of? Well, for the most part, we're talking about parchment. And no, that's not paper. It's actually painstakingly prepared animal skin, usually from goats, sheep, or cattle. Paper was a much, much later development. And what's really interesting is what wasn't used. The sources are clear. No papyrus, no simple leather manuscripts have been found in this tradition. And that tells us a ton about the resources and the tech they had at the time.
And the ink? What about that? Well, the standard black ink was usually carbon-based. I mean, literally made from soot. Pretty cool, right? For things like titles or special highlights, scribes would whip up red ink from minerals or plants. And every once in a while, for a really special manuscript, you might even spot some shimmering, golden, or super vibrant green inks. So when you put it all together, the birth of a book was just this incredible feat of craftsmanship. First, you've got the animal skins, which had to be meticulously prepared to become parchment. Then you've got the inks, ground and mixed by hand. And finally, these big prepared sheets, called bifolia, were folded and nested together into these little booklets called quires. It was only then, after all that work, that the physical book was finally ready for the scribe. All right, let's move on to the next chapter in our book's life, the moment a human hand starts filling those blank pages and bringing the text to life. Okay, so this brings us to our second big detective tool, paleography. This is all about studying the historical writing itself. It's how we decipher these ancient scripts, identify different handwriting styles, and really get into the mind and habits of the person who actually wrote the book, the scribe. And these scribes were total masters of efficiency. You have to remember, parchment was super expensive, and their time was precious. So to save on both, they developed this really complex system of abbreviations, kind of like a scribal shorthand. So a common phrase like etc. just becomes &c, and something sacred like Sanctus Spiritus might get shortened to SCS-SPS. But here's the thing, scribes weren't just human photocopiers, not at all. They were often the very first critical readers of a text. As they were copying, they'd be making corrections to their own mistakes. They'd add what's called glossing. Those are little notes or translations right there in the margins. And sometimes they even left their own personal annotations, their own thoughts. They were literally in a conversation with the text they were creating. But the story doesn't stop with the scribe, right? What happens next? What happens after the book leaves the workshop and starts its journey out in the world, passing from one reader to the next over generations? And that brings us to the next and maybe most fascinating phase of the book's life. See, a manuscript wasn't some static object, sealed in time. It was a living document, constantly being shaped and changed by the very people who owned and read it for centuries. And you can literally see the physical evidence of this life right on the pages. You'll find cases where owners added completely new texts to blank pages at the end of a book. When leaves got damaged, they were repaired or replaced, sometimes centuries later, using different parchment and in a totally different handwriting. It was also pretty common for completely separate manuscripts to get rebound together into one big new volume. Okay, check out this fantastic example from the source material. We've got this manuscript, DD007, from a place called Dobra Damo, and it's dated all the way back to 1610. The main work in it is called Faith of the Fathers. But if you flip to the very end, starting on folio 289, boom, you find a completely different text, the Book of the Letter of Our Lord. And it was clearly added way later by a different owner. That is a perfect footprint of the book's long, long journey. So we've got all these clues: the parchment, the ink, the handwriting, the repairs. How do we piece it all together to decode the hidden biography of a single book?
Well, when we pull all of these clues together, a full story just starts to emerge. The parchment itself, that can tell us about the economy and even help date the book. The ink composition, we can analyze that scientifically. Those little scribal errors, they show us the human touch. The annotations left by readers, that reveals how the book was actually used and valued. And all those repairs and rebindings, that traces the book's provenance, its unique history of ownership through the centuries.
So here is the crucial point, the main takeaway. Every single manuscript is way more than just a text. It is a unique archaeological object. It's a time capsule that preserves not only the words on the page, but the entire story of its own creation, its use, and its journey through human hands.
So the next time you hold a book, I don't care if it's an ancient text or a modern paperback, I want you to really think about this. Feel its weight, look at the paper, the binding, the typeface. Ask yourself, what's its hidden biography? What's the story that you can find hiding just beyond the words on the page?